everybody. I want to introduce Paul Sanford here. This is an ongoing series I'm doing, interviewing my heroes. So I'm really super excited. We're starting off with Paul Sanford. He's definitely a legend out of the Pacific Northwest. So welcome to the show, Paul.
Thank you, Tom. It's good to see you.
Great to see you.
Your background there. That's pretty.
Yeah, in my natural environment.
Yeah.
So to start off, can you tell the world about who Paul Sanford is?
Okay, I am a longtime cannabis activist, basically since I was a kid. About a week after my 18th birthday, I went to the White House smoke-in back in 1978 and protested marijuana laws with Jimmy Carter as the president at that time. We chanted things like paraquat peanuts. Paraquat was a substance they were spraying on cannabis in Mexico that then would get harvested and poison American users. Carter was a peanut farmer, so that was one of the chants. And anyway, it was quite an event. Later, I was in the Army when I was 19 for about 9 months. I tore the cartilage in my knee. I got out as a disabled veteran. That paid my way through school, really. So I went to college as soon as I got out of the military and started at Evergreen State College in Olympia in 1981. And at one point, I wrote a letter to first I wrote a letter to the Yippies in Washington, D.C. I had read a book by Abby Hoffman called Soon to Be a Major Motion Picture. And at the back of it, it said, if you want to get involved with the Yippies, then write them in New York City, contact Dana Beal. So I did. And I became a contact in their magazine. It was called Overthrow. And it told you how to make free phone calls by giving you the codes to the phone credit cards at the time. And they were working on progressive politics, anti-war, and cannabis liberation. So I did a couple of concerts in Washington with the Yippies. They did a national tour called the Rock Against Reagan Tour. And they came to the Seattle Center. We put on one show, and at the Washington State Capitol. But after doing that, then I contacted National Normal, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. And I got in touch with their director at the time, Kevin Zeese. And in a short period of time, he named me as the Washington State Normal Coordinator and sent me a big 16 millimeter reel of the movie Reefer Madness. So I started showing that movie, not just at Evergreen State College, but at Washington State University, at the University of Washington, and saying that we should do an initiative like Oregon had tried to do. So while going to Evergreen State College, I had a summer break. I took summer classes too, but I still had about 6 or 7 weeks out. So I have, like to say, I'm quite trivial. I like to answer trivia questions and things like that. I know a little bit about a lot of little stuff. And so I went down and tried to get on trivia game shows in LA. Things like The Joker's Wild, Jeopardy, things that were based on trivia. I never made it on the air, but took a lot of tests and I passed them. But they have a lot of people to choose from. But while I was staying in LA, I looked in the local newspaper and found that Tom Hayden was running for state assembly. So I got a job working for him in front of the Santa Monica DMV, signing up voters, registered voters in Santa Monica to try to get them to vote for Tom Hayden. And that was actually his first successful political run. He lost running for California senator to the U.S. Senate a couple of times before that. But he was elected to the state assembly, and he stayed in Sacramento the rest of his career. But And I was staying in LA. I didn't have a lot of money. I looked in the Overthrow magazine where I was listed as a contact, and it said that the Reefer Raiders were in LA. So I contacted them, and they said that I could come and stay at this shop on Van Nuys Boulevard called Heads and Highs. And there was a guy named Ed Adair who owned this shop, Heads and Highs. So I stayed in the blacklight room in the back of Heads and Highs for about 3 weeks, smoking cannabis, going and working for Tom Hayden in Santa Monica. It was quite a trek back and forth, you know. But anyway, I was time. It came time to go back to Evergreen State College, and I told him, okay, I'm leaving. And so Ed Adair told me I should meet his friend who owned a head shop just about a mile away called High Country. And his friend was Jack Hare. And so I went down and I met Jack Hare at his shop and hung out with him for an evening. He took us out to dinner at a Sambo's restaurant. I remember that. And we talked about how Oregon had tried to put marijuana legalization on the ballot and come very, very close. It was in the news at the time in 1982. And Jack told me how he had worked on the 1972 initiative in California, which was the first marijuana legalization initiative that made the ballot and was voted on statewide. It lost with 37% of the vote, I think it was. It was in the 30s. And so I left and went back to school, and I decided actually in the summer of 1984, that I would go down and help the folks with the Oregon Marijuana Initiative. And so at the same time, Jack Hare moved down to help with that initiative. And we both, in a short period of time, got involved with the people in Oregon. So the Oregon Marijuana Initiative was run by a mutual friend of ours, John Sajo. And John Sajo had a progressive team of people, Dr. Fred Orther, a number of others that were working, Doug McVeigh, a bunch of different people. But I came in and they were doing a magazine called the OMI Report. It later changed its name to the Marijuana Report. So I went and started selling ads for this newspaper to local halide shop owners, horticultural stores, head shops. And within a short period of time, I discovered that the OMI was being financed by growing cannabis. And so OMI was the Oregon Marijuana Initiative. So in a short order of time, I moved to Oregon in August with just my car and hardly any money. And by, I think, the 1st of October, I was set up in a grow house and taught how to grow marijuana. And Sajo's an organic grower. He took me up to some of his grows up in the Siskiyou Mountains. We camped out there for a few days, including on top of a mountain with a big fire post tower on top of it. But I started growing marijuana in my basement, and soon I brought another friend in and rented another house, and we were funding that initiative. I was taking a lot of Oregon weed and taking it up to Washington, where I knew a lot of people, and selling it at the universities in Washington. And so that is how we were financing the initiative. But a snitch came in, and in July of 1986, we were on the ballot for marijuana legalization. This was the second initiative in the history of the United States to make the ballot, and it was ballot measure 5 in 1986. We actually qualified that initiative earlier than any other initiative in state history. We qualified on November 1st for the vote, November 6th of the following year. But that gave the federal government a lot of time to come in. We had George H.W. Bush, who was the vice president at the time, and the first head of the Office of National Drug Control Policy, which we call that the drug czar, though I hate that term. And he toured the state for 13 consecutive days to campaign against our initiative. Nancy Reagan came 3 different times. The whole Western United States, U.S. attorneys from all the surrounding states came and campaigned against our initiative. We filed election law complaints saying that, they're not supposed to use non-elected public officials in political matters. But the U.S. Attorney General at the time was Ed Meese, and he ruled that our initiative was not a political issue; it was a law enforcement issue. Then, come July 17th of 1986, the police kicked in my door and several other people's doors that I had. They didn't kick in Joe's. They didn't kick in Jack Hare's, because Jack Hare at that time was just about 3 blocks away from me. They had, but their informant didn't know about those enough to get warrants. So they had an audio tape of this informant with a body wire, while I had a trim going on with about 10 people at my house trimming cannabis. And Jack Hare was one of the people there trimming the cannabis, along with his girlfriend and mother of his children, Vanetta, at the time. But they never did anything to him. Anyway, I got busted, and it was highly political arrest. When they have most drug busts, they lay out guns and money and drugs. In my case, they laid out the Oregon Marijuana Initiative newspapers and books and hats and T-shirts that I had in my house to, campaign against the initiative. We ended up losing in 1986 with just 27% of the vote. And so, and obviously my arrest put a damper on things, unfortunately. Scared a lot of people. Scared me, of course, too. In the end, though, I ended up getting 5 years probation. And that sent me back to school again in Portland State, because I'm a disabled veteran. They pay my tuition and paid me to go to school. So I started studying. I found that China had the world's largest hemp crop. I had actually done a lot of research for the very first edition of Jack Hare's book. So I had given him that research for the first edition. And he, at the time, Jack had 3 little kids. And for those of you out there who don't know, which probably isn't very many in your audience, Jack wrote a book called The Emperor Wears No Clothes, about the secret history of marijuana in America and the world. And so that book, I never imagined how much impact it would have, actually. But he had 3 little kids at the time, and his book was heavy on pictures and articles out of newspapers that were rare copies of newspapers, And so there was a lot of cutting and pasting going on there. This was when cut and paste meant scissors and glue. You didn't have a computer. No one had a computer in 1985, and this is in 1985. So he asked if he could come to my house about 3 blocks away, and I didn't have any family or kids, and put his book together. So he brought in his team of people, which was Carolee Wilson and Bryce Gardner and Jack Hare, who really put the book together. Jack talked a lot, but Carolee and Bryce did most of the actual work, but under his direction. And so the book was published first as a campaign piece for the Oregon Marijuana Initiative petition. And so they printed it as on newsprint, put those out in a number of districts. And we actually won in Measure 5 in the 86 election, every place where we could put that newspaper in somebody's box. So anyway, I got busted. I went back to school to fulfill my probation requirement, that I have to have a job or go to school. And I started studying Chinese. And I'd always had an interest in Chinese culture since I was a kid. I'd studied it, done reports on it, and I was really fascinated with the Tao Te Ching, Chinese philosophy. In fact, if you'd asked me from the age of 13 to 18 what my religion is, I would have told you I'm a Taoist. Now I'm just an agnostic since then. But anyway, I started studying Chinese because I realized that China had the world's largest hemp crop. So I got into an exchange program, and in 1988, I went to school in Zhengzhou in Henan province, which is like the cradle of Han Chinese culture. And I all my classes were canceled. I was going back in 1989, went back to Beijing University in 1990 and to Zhengzhou in 1990. And I found several sources for hemp cloth and hemp paper. And so I started importing hemp cloth and hemp paper. And I actually first financed that by, guess how? I grew marijuana. And I used that money to pay for the letters of credit. And I started selling hemp paper and did it pretty successfully from 1988 to 1997. We got a lot of publicity. But in 1991, I got busted again, this time by the feds. And so they had an informant out there who came and worked at my hemp paper company, and then he left, and I got busted shortly after he left. And so there's a local prosecutor, assistant U.S. attorney, Jonathan Cobb, who since has actually become my friend. But and I testify for him in defense cases now. But at the time, he was a U.S. attorney, and I went to trial in December of 1983, and I was facing a 10-year mandatory minimum sentence because I had the prior conviction. There were about 115 pot plants growing at the place they arrested. And so if I had been found guilty, I would have done 10 years in federal prison. But I basically admitted I'd done everything that they would accuse me of. One of the guys the guy who lived at this house, who claimed to be a crystal healer, he testified, the only reason he was testifying against me was so he wouldn't go to prison for 10 years. So at that point, the jury got to find out I was facing 10 years. Normally, juries don't know how much you're going to get in a marijuana case, and they probably thought, you just get probation or something. So that informed the jury the seriousness there. But my lawyer had looked over and his name was Paul Pendergraft. Paul Peterson. He had found that they had confiscated about 20 of my books from my library about marijuana. And that, so when it came time to and we never called any witnesses in this case. We only cross-examined the prosecution's witness, or he did. I was really most involved in the voir dire process, which is jury selection. And jury selection is really the most important part of any trial, but because you want a fair jury. So he got a chance to cross-examine the cop who found those books. The prosecutor brought the books out, pointed out that most of them were autographed. And so then my attorney got a chance to cross, and he talked about a lot of other stuff he found in my house, not just that, but that was just one thing. So when my defense attorney, Paul Peterson, got a chance to cross-examine, the first thing he said was, "Get this book, Marijuana, Your Legal Rights." And he picked it up. Turn to page 219. He turns there. Read the chapter headline. The cops started stuttering. I don't know. And the judge told him to read it. The prosecutor. Anyway, finally, it came out. The chapter headline is "Jurors Can Acquit Defendants Even If They Think They're Guilty." And there's a whole chapter about jury nullification and how jurors can decide that the law is wrong rather than the defendant. And normally, a defendant and a defense attorney can't tell the jury this secret knowledge. But in this